Okay, so coffee break is now coming to a close. My name is Priya Kumar, and I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Social Media Lab, and I actually research learning analytics in the social media age. So this conference has been really exciting and fascinating for my own work. We have 5 different presentations today. They're going to be 15 minutes each, and we'd like to save the discussion for the end. So if there is one question, let's say during the presentation, maybe towards the end, you can come to the sides and ask, but if you can save it till the end, that would be great. So we'll start first with Brett from Tilberg University, who's going to be presenting our more tweeted papers and topics, also more contradicted.
Hello, everybody. Hopefully not too tired and etc. Yeah, so I'm basically going to present some evidence. Most of the conference has been about, I would say, more technical things, but now I'm going to look at what drives alt metrics. So what leads to, for instance, a paper or a topic being tweeted about a lot. And we are going to suggest that it's when there's disagreement. Thanks to my collaborators, Jürgen Buder, who's back in Germany, and Rodrigo, and I'm Brett. Before we get into anything, I think we can see this disagreement, high attention in the most discussed papers. So if we look at, I already gave a presentation about this, so if you were there, but I'm going to repeat it. The most discussed papers of 2014 was that Facebook emotion manipulation study. That had the highest altmetric score, and I think everybody knows that it was a very controversial paper. And then if you look at the second most discussed paper of 2014, it's a paper about whether fish are racist or not. Basically, whitefish like whitefish and blackfish like blackfish, even when they are in close proximity. Again, you can see this type of phenomena in the 2015 and 2016 articles. The top 2015 was, for instance, whether there's a magic antibiotic that can kill pretty much anything, whether autism is related to vaccines, whether there is a extinction coming for humans, whether we know basically what happens, what causes cancer, and whether psychological science is reproducible or not. So these are all very controversial topics, and they were all paid a lot of attention to. 2016, it's the same thing, but I'm just going to save time. This is a pretty old idea, but I think it's potentially something that we don't talk about that much in the altmetric community. Liam Fessinger is a very famous psychologist, my favorite psychologist. He had this awesome paper about informal social communication. That's what the paper is called. And basically he says that groups will talk more about things that they disagree about. So the more item X is disagreed about, the more we will talk about it, especially when that topic, item X, is relevant for the individual or group outcomes. So if it's a threat to me or if it's a threat to the group, we're going to talk about it more. And I think that's easily visible in the cancer, in autism and vaccines, and whether psychology is reproducible or not, and whether there's an extinction, for instance. So there's some anecdotal evidence that I'm going to point, and now we're going to try to empiricize this. Also, okay, I don't have that much time, but when we talk about how science should be done, this is also a very common idea. So Thomas Kuhn, Hegel, Socrates, they basically said argument is good. Argument leads to better knowledge creation, quicker, more effective knowledge creation. There's a lot of evidence about this. I'm not going to go through all of it. So basically, we're going to do a study. We're going to try and empiricize this idea and show that more disagreed about topics are more tweeted. The way that we did this is probably the hardest slide, but basically we had this big set from Rodrigo of 162,000 tweets, which are about papers, so tweets about papers, and those papers are about topics, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to narrow from tweets to topics. And the idea is somehow, are the number of contradictions in those tweets related to the number of tweets that there are? Okay, so I hope that's clear. This sort of triangle thing, we have a very broad base, but then we can really get a good fine measurement at the topic level. We're going to 1,900 microtopics from Waltman and Eck. On average is about 82 tweets per topic, but the median is 18, so you see this large skew. Yeah, I don't think that we'll get too much into the top 10 most discussed microtopics are things like dinosaurs, brain-computer interfaces, bacteria, butterfly conservation, obesity, gene sequencing, and effect sizes, replications, this sort of stuff. The important part here is not necessarily how many tweets. These are the most discussed topics. But if we look on the far, for you, right side, you're going to see the negation scores. So how many, and I'll talk about this score in a minute. But you see on the far right side, almost all of them are above the average in terms of negation. So these most discussed topics are also more negated. Again, just anecdotal evidence, but this is significant if we take the average of them. So I think that there's some nice evidence for that. How do we come about this negation score? I think that's probably everyone's question at this point. Basically, it's 10 terms that I will argue indicate disagreement or contradiction. They're not, but, however, wrong, incorrect, error, problem, fight, doubt, and contradiction. We also included NTs in order to include all those words like didn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, couldn't, that sort of stuff. And basically what we did was we did a dictionary approach. So we looked at every word in these tweets, and then we basically said, is it but, is it not, does it contain NT, that sort of stuff. And this is our contradiction measure. I hope that's okay for you. It's very similar to other. Okay, now what we do is we look at the average number of tweets. So on average, each tweet has 0.05. So it's about 1 in 20 tweets has one of these contradiction terms. And then if we group to the microtopic level, we see that it's about 1 in 3. And this is already some evidence that larger discussions include more contradictions, because as those topics with, say, 1,000 tweets become only counted one time at the microtopic level, the average goes down, right? So as we move from counting every individual tweet equally to counting only the microtopics individually, it goes down. Just let me know how to do that. Okay. Now let's take just a quick look at the most controversial tweets, or the most controversial topics. This is what we call in psychology face validity. So you just basically look at them. You say, it's the gender wage gap, basically, was the most controversial tweet. And on average, they contained one of these terms, or basically 0.9 of these terms. But then you see also things like American Indians, Aboriginals, habit formation and fertility, bipolar depression. Each of these is controversial for its own reason. I'm just highlighting the ones that are very in-your-face controversial. Alternative medicine, and again, sex differences with the 2-4 mental rotation, that sort of stuff. So this is what we call face validity, but yeah. Again, if you look at these most controversial tweets or most controversial topics, you see on the farthest right side, it's too small, I guess, for you guys to see. But if you look at the standardized number of tweets, again, they are above the mean. So if you look at these top 10 topics, the number of tweets standardized are about half a standard deviation above the mean. And that is significant, even with only a sample size of 10, which indicates that this is somehow a substantial effect. What we did in order to actually apply some statistics here, rather than just kind of these anecdotal ones, was we removed any topic with less than 20 tweets. So we removed about half of the microtopics, just because I don't really have time to go into it. But if you only have one tweet and that one tweet has the word but in it, then it has an average score of 1, and it's instantly the most controversial topic. So we remove those because the average is 0.05 overall. So at 20 tweets, if one of those tweets has a but in it, then it's at the average. But basically, if we look at a correlation between the number of tweets and the number of contradictions in those tweets, we see a 0.13 correlation, which is not huge. But again, this is a very simple analysis. I know that maybe it looks like there's some sort of negative on that graph, but you have to keep in mind regression to the mean. So if there's only 20 tweets about a topic, it's much more likely that it can have a high. So if there's 1,000 tweets about a topic, then it's very difficult for it to have a but in all those tweets or a not in all those tweets. But if there's only 20, then it's a little bit easier, even if it's just random. So we see this correlation of 0.13. This is statistically significant. you can do the same thing with the regression. We only kept about half of the microtopics, but those microtopics contain about 95% of the tweets. So while we removed half of the microtopics, yeah, we're still keeping 154,000 out of 162,000 tweets. In the end, we did find anecdotal and statistical evidence that the number of tweets about a topic and the number of contradictions in those tweets are positively related. Not very strongly, but it is there. One thing that could lead to this kind of 0.13 correlation is it's a very large number of tweets. If you look at the top 100, I'm pretty sure that you will see a stronger relationship, and I realize now that it would have been smart to do the top 100 all-metric papers, but that's not what we did. But the implications of this work is actually something like Kuhn, Popper, Platt. So these guys talk about how science should work, but they're all philosophers, and they didn't really empiricize their work. And by showing that, Kuhn, for instance, talks about paradigm changes and anomalies. So when we don't understand something, that's when we start to actually do extraordinary science, he says. That's disagreement, debate about fundamentals, and that's really what he says drives science, also Popper and Platt. And I think that there's a lot more evidence that could be gathered for these ideas, but the idea is, in the end, don't be afraid to do something that's potentially controversial. That's probably where the best work can be done. At least that's what the philosophers say. And that's pretty much it. There are some problems. It would be good to do this study multi-level. It would be better to operationalize the way that we talk about conflict. One thing is that these are only the tweets that link to the paper. So this isn't the entire conversation. So here's one tweet that we have. This one tweet could have gotten 20 replies or 100 replies, or if you have an ability to get that data, that would be really awesome, because then we could see, for instance, are controversial first tweets more likely to get further tweets or retweets or longer conversations in general, which I would suspect, obviously, that that's the case. There's obviously other ways that we could do this study, like, for instance, on Facebook. So our topics that are more talked about on Facebook, also more controversial, or Quora, PubPeer. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that we can do this study, and I would be happy if any of you have these data to run this analysis on those data. I think I'm on time. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no questions, we can move to the next. Oh, okay.
I was just wondering whether or not you did any sub-analysis by sort of subject category, because obviously certain topics will be more sort of popular or what have you, more of a general knowledge as opposed to a specific knowledge. So I wondered if you did any of that kind of sub-analysis. And also I was wondering if you did any analysis of citation data, because you're looking at negative citation data, that kind of thing, and to what extent there was any kind of correlation between positive and negative cites and positive and negative tweets.
So in terms of specific analyses on the topics, basically we have the topics, the topic labels. I didn't try to quantify how general knowledge or how specific knowledge plays a role. I think that could be done. I think it could be interesting, but I didn't do it. What was the second question? It was about... That's okay.
To look at to what extent...
citations.
Negative citations and negative tweeting.
Campanario is a researcher. He did a survey of Nobel Prize winners and Nobel Prize laureates about their experiences with their research. Basically, he found that when these Nobel laureates were first coming out with their research, they were largely rejected. So many of them had to submit to multiple journals when they came out. Again, this is Kuhn's idea, basically. So when an anomaly comes up, people first, they try to prove it wrong. They try to say it's an error. Then only when that error keeps happening, then they're like, okay, maybe there's something here. This is kind of a freaky thing. What's going on? And then it creates cognitive conflict, which I didn't really talk about in this talk, but then people are motivated to reduce that conflict. Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
All original tweets, or are you also looking at retweets, responses, questions, so the connections between the tweets?
Yeah, we didn't remove retweets, we didn't remove titles, anything like that. The idea behind that is, do people retweet more negative tweets? So that would be one way. And for instance, do people retweet or tweet in general more negative paper titles? I can't talk to that right now because I don't have the analysis, but I'd be happy if you would like to do that analysis or you would like to help me do that analysis. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah. Thank you. I'm around. Oh, I don't think we have time. Save it till the end. No, sorry. I don't know. I had 15 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll take questions at the end. So right away, if there are two questions, we can take those, but then we can save some for the end discussion. Next, I'm going to invite Zore up. From the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden University, who will be presenting what explains the imbalance use of social media across different countries. And it's a cross-country analysis of presence of Twitter users tweeting scholarly publications.
Hello everyone, I'm Zohra. The topic that I want to explain today is on the social media, scholarly social media usage or these altmetrics across different countries, and to emphasize the fact that this activity could be influenced by some different factors across different countries. That shouldn't be ignored while we are analyzing altmetrics for any purposes, and particularly in the context of research evaluation. So the aim is to raise this concern for altmetrics community to consider any potential barriers that exist among different countries in their use of social media. So with this study, we aim to analyze both Twitter activity and Twitter presence across different countries. And with Twitter activity, we mean the extent to which Twitter users from different countries are tweeting scholarly publications. And this gives a general geographical distribution and overview of Twitter users across the world who are tweeting a scholarly publication. And with Twitter presence, we mean the extent to which publications affiliated to authors from different countries are tweeted. So this gives a kind of general overview of authors of these tweeted publications. And also doing this in order to identify some potential reasons that influence this Twitter activity across different countries. Does it work? Yes. It is. Sorry. Okay, for this study, we used a data set of about 6 million Web of Science publications that have DOIs and that were published in the years 2012 to 2015. And these publications were matched based on their DOI with altmetric.com database in order to collect the Twitter information that we were interested to analyze. And the Twitter information that we extracted from altmetric.com was this geolocation of Twitter users and also the number of tweets per publications, and these information or data were aggregated at the country level. And the country of author of affiliation of these publications were retrieved from the in-house Web of Science database. And we calculate also some indicators such as proportion of Twitter users, proportion of tweeted publications, and proportion of tweets across these countries. And with the country of Twitter user, we mean this. So you can see it on the left side of this slide. So this actually altmetric.com does a good job in extracting the self-assigned geolocations of Twitter users. And with the country of authors of tweeted paper, we mean the country of author affiliation that we retrieve with via Web of Science. So we were interested to answer these questions. which countries are actively tweeting Web of Science publications, and on one hand, and on the other hand, to what extent Web of Science publications are tweeted across different countries. And also, particularly, we were interested to see whether Twitter users from different countries are interested to tweet the publications from their home countries or other countries, and at the end to have some idea of what would explain this Twitter activity across different countries. So this shows the geographical distribution of both authors and Twitter users. And on the left side, we see this proportion of authors of these tweeted publications. And this is something that we already know about it, and we know that these publications are affiliated mostly to US, China, UK, Germany, and less than 5% of them are affiliated to other countries. And on the right side, we see the distribution of countries of Twitter users, which were obtained through altmetric.com. And at the first place, we see that from altmetric.com, about 40% of country affiliation of Twitter users are not available, but for those Twitter users that their country of affiliation or geolocations are available, we see the same picture. So again here we see that 20% or the large amount of these users come from US and then UK and some big countries. And so this shows that both authors and also Twitter users are dominated by big countries. And we have the same picture across both Web of Science and altmetric aggregators. So actually, this shows the big picture of the things that I've already explained. And this shows for example, is about the proportion of publications that tweeted at least once by one of these authors of these countries. And we have the same picture for Twitter users from different countries that are tweeting these publications. And we were also interested to know whether these Twitter users are tweeting publications from their home countries or other countries. And we see that most tweeted publications are affiliated to US and then to UK and Canada and then other countries. And this was also the case for Twitter users from other countries as well. So the first countries of tweeted publication were always United States and then other countries in the second, third, or fifth place. So this brings us to these questions that what would be the reasons for this imbalanced use of Twitter users across different countries? So why some countries are among the main users of this platform? So one factor would be related to the country's output size and its Twitter activity. So we know that there is a relationship between these two. So the more outputs, the more the countries with the more output are more benefited in Twitter. And for example, US, these are among the potential leaders of this activity. But again, here we see that, for example, China relatively has a large output size in Web of Science, but its Twitter activity is not that much. So there should be other reasons as well. So one other reason related to countries' access to internet. And we obtained this information from Telecommunication Union, which have this annual report on ICT across different countries. And this shows again that the more technology-oriented countries are the leading countries in terms of their tweeting activity. And also this organization, International Telecommunication Union, annually they report about ICT penetration across different countries. And they have also observed that developing countries and some countries are lagging behind in terms of ICT access, ICT infrastructure, and ICT usage. So that's one other reason. And beside that, there are also some social media filters policy across different countries that influence the Twitter usage. And for example, some countries are, some platforms are not available across some countries, and also there are some censorships that influence this Twitter activity or other social media activity that we should consider them. And also many other factors that also in the workshop you and other people has presented about what would influence this Twitter activity. So I have some remarks on this. So based on this, and based on other studies that have been done, so we see that there is a bias, and we should consider that. Then when we analyze altmetrics, and then also Alperin warned that altmetrics favor developed countries, and then hence potentials of altmetrics for serving the scholars from developing countries or the so-called alternative scholars is essentially neglected. And this seems that the benefit of social media, which have the potential to bridge this digital divide, is neglected here. And this brings us to the last slide. So with this question, open question, that based on this, so are we experiencing altmetrics divide? And I would like to end my presentation with this. Thank you.
Any questions?
As a European, I wonder what's going on with Germany and France, because any idea?
In terms of their Twitter activity, actually, so US and UK are on the top, and then also, for example, when we consider this proportion of publication with at least one tweet, we see that some European countries, like I think Germany as well, here. Relatively, but after US and UK, we have also the stronger presence of these countries as well. But again, I think maybe a language bias or also other things also affects.
No, I'm not German. I was just going to say that maybe it's also due to early adoption. So the social media, became adopted by the US, and then it moved to the UK, and then it kind of spread out from there. So it could be that as well.
Yeah, maybe. Privacy. Yes, that's also a good factor. So there are many different factors that we should think about them. So if you have any idea or if you want to discuss this, please come to me after in the break, and we'll discuss it more. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have Freshte, who is going to be presenting the quality of interactions and engagement around research articles on Twitter from Simon Fraser University. And we're doing great on time, so we'll have a lot of time to discuss afterwards. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Freshte from the Scholarly Communications Lab, Simon Fraser University. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the quality of interactions and engagement happening around research articles on Twitter. Yeah, we want to go beyond the counts of tweets and see the quality, what a tweet really indicates across different disciplines. So the aim is to study the composition of the participants on Twitter. Who are the users? Of course, we have the data from the demographic information of the Twitter users from altmetric.com, but I'll show that of course, they also warn us that we should be cautious, so we needed to do everything manually. And also, we will look at the distribution of tweets across types of engagement. We define 3 types of engagement, means dissemination, if the tweet is just for the aim of dissemination, or consultation, it is a suggestion or recommendation to read a paper, or it's evaluating a research article in a negative or positive way. And also, we examine the issues of false popularity. And I'm going to present here only the online harassment that we found in life sciences, and also the existence of clone accounts, and that I think some people call it duplicate or maybe alternative accounts. Okay, the articles from 2014 Web of Science were collected, all of the articles, more than 1,400,000 articles, and then we mapped it through 5 main fields, CWTS, 5 broad fields, and again, we split it into 4,000 microclusters. They are narrow fields, narrow categories defined by CWTS again, and we picked 5 microclusters or narrow fields that have the highest Twitter intensity. By Twitter intensity, I mean the highest average number of tweets per paper. And we took a sample of 50 articles from each of the 5 main fields, and we had around 8,000 tweets for this paper. I want to show you, maybe it's the answer to you lady question, and that you like to see the maybe percentage of tweets across different disciplines. We found this that, okay, the almost 46% of articles in social sciences, more than 45% again in health sciences, and more than 32% in life sciences are tweeted, and the list goes to physical sciences and mathematics and computer sciences. So after this, we needed to figure out and examine the user types. We wanted to know, okay, we have 250 articles from these 5 fields that I showed you, and 8,000 tweets. Let's see who are the users on Twitter who are tweeting about these 250 articles across different fields. And based on altmetric.com, as you say, okay, it seems members of public are the dominant group, but as I told you, they also warn people to be cautious about this information that they provide. So we couldn't really rely on this because it can't be possible, really. It says in life and information sciences, life and air sciences, it's more than 93% of users, they are general public, a member of public. So we decided to do it manually, and we came to this result, that the main group are scientists. Of course, we call it sometimes researchers or scientists, but yeah, I prefer scientists. But this is my collaborator idea to be a researcher. Anyway, as you see, in social and humanities sciences, we have researchers or scientists as a top group, and while in biomedical and health sciences, we see the professionals, practitioners come first. And in life and earth sciences, we have the organizations that are mainly social civil organizations, and we have the top group in physical sciences, scientists, and we have scientists again as a top group in mathematical and computer science. Mostly in most of the fields, citizens or general public goes the second, Okay, and we like also to figure out, are they human beings or bots or a mix of it? And we came to this. It seems in social sciences and humanities, it's more reliable because more than 94% of the users that we had in our sample found to be human. And the problem was with life and air sciences that more than 65% found to be a bot. And we like to know why. What's the reason? Why there are a lot of bots there? So we digged into the data, and we found a lot of clone accounts. I gave an example here. Most clones are organizations. So as you see here, there is this guy, Fabiano Barreto, from Global Garbage Incorporation, and then he has his own page on Twitter, and it's not a bot. We just checked it frequently, and he's doing like a human. He posting photos of him, of conferences that he's taking part. It's cool, but he made few accounts with different names for his company. And one account is Global Garbage, which is retweeting very frequently every day, like every 2 minutes or 5 minutes, the articles that are related to recycling, sustainability, and different environmental sciences. And the other accounts are just retweeting the Global Garbage tweets, because we see that the other accounts, it takes time of them, like 2 days later, they retweet the Global Garbage tweets. And yeah, we found a lot of them in life and air sciences. I should have stopped this, information sciences. Okay, and yeah, this was the main reason for having a lot of bots in life and air sciences. Okay, the next step is that we looked at the quality of engagement and how we define engagement at 3 levels. Dissemination, is it just for distributing and disseminating the article? Then they only put the title in the tweet or the URL of the article, or both. So I gave you an example here, just the title and also the URL, of course. The second level, the second type of engagement that we define is consultation. That, for example, it says, that is definitely true, see the work of Hembrick, or they suggest it. And there are a lot of this, in health sciences, we found a lot of practitioners that are suggesting an article maybe to their patients. They should have a lot of patients in their network. And then the last level is evaluation, yeah? Did they evaluate the research article positively or negatively? Like, for example, it says, the journal Intelligence did a great study, and then he provides the link to the article, or negatively, that we saw this mainly in mathematics. I'll show you the percentage here. Okay, then how was it? It was like in social sciences and humanities, we had different types of engagement. Yeah, around 76% go to dissemination, but we have also around 12% consultation. Somebody is recommending a paper. And evaluation, we have positive evaluation in social sciences and also negative ones, but as you see, most negative evaluations of research articles on Twitter goes in mathematics and computer science. We have a little bit of consultation also in mathematics and computer science. But mostly, as you see across fields, most of the tweets are just about disseminating and distributing the research article. Okay. The next step was looking at false popularity. We did online harassment. We also looked at if the content of the tweet is humor, light. But for this presentation, I want to report online harassment. And how was it? As you see, we have nothing really in most fields, but 79% of the tweets are showing a sign of harassment. I like to call it harassment, and I tell you why. It's because all of those tweets were about this paper, Structural and Electronic Properties of Chiral Single-Wall Copper Nanotubes. It was done by 3 Chinese authors, and why it was attracting a lot of attention on Twitter on the first and second day of, no, actually it was 1 month after publication, but as soon as it got into Twitter on the first day and the second day, it got more than 1,000 tweets. And as you see, it was only because of an acronym that if you just search a title, you'll see it everywhere in the abstract. And sometimes people were calling this the best abstract ever. Okay, then 1,400 tweets from 1,304 unique tweeters since 6th of March 2014. The paper was published February 2014, 1 month after publication, and then 4,000 downloads, but only 2 citations. Okay, and then how was it? I like to see, I was so curious to know who was the first who tweeted this famous, online, of course, popular paper, and he was a scientist, Dr. Ruberium. He's a chemical scientist. He actually wrote this to one of his colleagues, Dr. Martin Francis, and then she didn't mention anything. She just put an ad at this other colleague and mentioned about this article, and then, yeah, what happened and spread around. And I like to see who are the people who are tweeting about this article, and we realized that more than 53% are individual scientists, and 38% are citizens, and 9% others. I also provided some examples of the tweets about this article. Of course, these are the most polite ones, then I could really put here. Okay. And I looked at a few days after the first post on Twitter about this article. As you see, in the first day, 6th of March, only scientists started talking about this article. And then on the second day, we see that citizens joined. And the first citizen was actually one of the followers of one of the scientists. Then he got it from the scientist, and he retweeted it into his own Twitter account, and yeah, citizens were aware of it. And you see the percentage here. Okay, this paper is actually, this is a very short version. We did an extended version about who started tweeting about research, those of research articles on Twitter for the first time. Who were the initiators, yeah? And if the initiators or the tweeters who started talking about research article are bots or human. Very interesting results. For example, I give you an example, like in social sciences, we found that most of people, we have a lot of citizens who start talking about research articles for the first time on Twitter. They bring the article to the Twitter for the first time themselves. But in other fields, we realized that scientists and professionals are those guys that, and we didn't see much of the journals, and it was a bit strange. And also we talked about retweeting, and also quality of retweeting, and also how many original tweets we have in different fields. And we talked about individual and group communication purposes, and more about false popularity issue, which is humor and light content. And you can see this, or ask me for a preprint. We submitted it to Journal Informatics, it's under review. Of course, we are just replying to the comments now. And I think I can provide you with a preprint if you ask me for. Concluding remarks is that there is a broad area of actors involved in the communication about science on Twitter, with individual scientists, as we see, and individual citizens playing the important role. The vast majority of communication activities around academic papers is undigested dissemination with almost no sign of debate, contestation, or collective reflection, which is not good. And the best part of this conclusion is that Twitter builds buzz, no doubt, but it may not necessarily make much meaningful contribution. So we should be cautious how to use number of tweets. That's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm sure by the time discussion starts, there will be a few questions for you. So next we have Tim from Wayne State University, who's going to be presenting ICANN has PDF tweets requesting publications behind the paywall. You? Yeah, use the arrows and your time is.
Gotcha. Hi.
How many of you have heard of ICANN has PDF? Ah, so a lot of you, all right. So for those of you who don't know, it's a hashtag that's used on Twitter to basically form a community where scientists or people at universities who have access to large repositories can provide papers to others who need them, basically. It all started back in 2011 when Andrea Kuzeski started the hashtag ICANNHasPDF. And she said later on when she was interviewed about this, she said it's an important act of civil disobedience and that it's not an aggressive act, but it's just a way of saying that things need to change. She also said that scientists who have access to journals through subscriptions look out for the tag so they can help their colleagues in need. So the way that people form or formulate this idea of ICANN has PDF is very interesting to me as a social theorist. And I use altmetric data to kind of represent how people frame these messages in a way that it's understood as something that's okay, even though it may be illegal in many instances. So the questions that I initially started with, and this has been an ongoing project, started way back in 2013. I started looking at this. There wasn't enough tweets that I could collect at that time, but as the time has passed, the usage, as you'll see, has gone up, so I've been able to collect more tweets on my own. I also use altmetric data. Thank you guys for providing altmetric data. And so it's giving me more information to look at. So what portion of tweets using some variation of this hashtag are requesting documents behind a paywall? So that's important to know. If not requesting a document, what type of discussions are occurring around this hashtag? And then finally, what are the characteristics of the tweets that use some variation of this hashtag? So again, I have altmetric data. I'm using the 2016 data set. And I also wrote a PHP script that allowed me to collect tweets from the Twitter streaming API, where I looked for 6 different versions of ICANN has PDF. So people spell it differently, they rotate the word order, etc. I also downloaded the directory of open access journals data so I could compare the journals to see if they were open access according to DOAJ. I looked at Sherpa's data using another PHP script that I wrote. So Sherpa has an API, so I was able to send the information and get information back. And then finally, I was interested in whether or not these people requesting documents are actually scientists. So at this point, before Rodrigo comes up here and blows it away, I guess, Kei, An, and Sugimoto just recently published a paper where they identified basically 45,000 scientists on Twitter, and to date, that's been the largest. So they were nice enough to share their data with me, so I was able to compare and see if these scientists are actually requesting these documents. So first of all, with altmetric data, I wanted to visualize across time the usage of ICANN has PDF or some variation of that. And as you can see, on the bottom is 2011, and the orange at the top is 2016. And you can see a steady increase in the use of these hashtags across time. Now, there is some weird peaks here, and I investigated the tweets more closely. And interestingly enough, and I don't know exactly, I'm a programmer and I understand the Twitter API, but I'm not sure why this is happening. There are a couple retweet accounts that are bot accounts that just retweet tweets asking for papers. And there's these huge spikes on a couple days where the retweet account is just blowing it away. And I'm not sure why that is happening, because usually with a bot, you're just going to check the stream every so often and retweet the tweet. So I'm not sure what's causing these big spikes. But overall, you can see the increase in the use. So with DOAJ matching, this is still, it needs more cleaning, and that's a limitation of this research, but so far I found basically 2% of the journals that were requested were open access journals. And you must ask why, right? So why are people asking ICANN has PDF on Twitter for open access documents? And my conclusion is that they're probably just lazy. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to look more closely at this, but that's what I found. So 98% is left. So what does that mean? So then I went to Sherpa. And so Sherpa Romeo produces creates data that they color code journals so that you know what level of access they can utilize for their documents. So green is they can archive preprint and postprint, blues can archive postprints, yellow preprints, and white not formally supported. And so the small little graph on the right side is the totals. So you see that green and yellow are the most requested. But then I broke it down into subject areas, and you see that social sciences is at the top, and this is mimicking what everyone's saying about tweeting on about science. And then psychiatry, psychology, plant and animal science, etc. Excuse me, the sun is, I can't read my slides now. So then I further broke it down into subject categories, and Rodrigo was nice enough to give me Web of Science data. So I wanted to see, based on the Web of Science and their coverage, what is expected and what we actually found, and looking at what kind of documents were requested. So you can see that with social sciences and Web of Science, there's only a 6% coverage, but they had a 9% request. And psychology is much bigger, so 2.7% in Web of Science, but the requested documents were at 7.73%. And you see at the very bottom, a 1% coverage of space science and Web of Science, but no requests on Twitter on poor space scientists. So that's the data behind this, but I wanted to look and apply social theory to this discussion. So when we look at the communications around this hashtag, and this is why I separately harvested tweets, because I didn't want tweets that just had, you know, DOIs or links to scientific articles. I wanted to look at the community around the hashtag. So the first one, guys, I have institutional access to research again, exclamation mark. I can has PDF me. So basically this person is saying, hey, I now have access to all these data sources, request them from me. Next is a very typical tweet that you would see. Does anyone have this article? And then author name and title with the hashtag. Next, I can has PDF. Does anyone have the full text, question mark, begging, icon, very grateful student. So they're framing this like, oh, I'm a poor student, please send me this article, I need it very badly. Next, hi, I'm struggling to find this one, not even sure if it was published in JSEP as told. They include a screenshot from ResearchGate. So they found this article on ResearchGate, they can't get the full text, they don't even know what journal it actually is in, but can you please help out? And finally, the last example I just want to show you is ICANN has a PDF, a link to the paper, and then in parentheses, I should have access, but it can't seem to get it to work. So they're saying, you know, normally I have access, but I can't get it to work, so send me the information. Now, when we look at the profiles, I separated these out. So the tweets I captured around the community using the hashtag ICANNHasPDF, and then the tweets that are using the hashtag but specifically mentioning scientific articles from altmetric.com. And this needs a much more work, but what I did was basically in my database, I used small strings to determine what kind of information was contained in the profile. So at the top, research. Research is in all the profile descriptions, most descriptions in both sets of groups, and then in the altmetrics, it's by all, and BIOL. And as Freshly just said, maybe it's not the biology scientists, but maybe it's the practitioners or what have you. And in the ICANNHasPDF hashtags, and I'm sorry it's so small on the screen, LIBR and open is toward the top. And LIBR can cover librarians, libraries. So I think that a lot of, and based on my own reading of the tweets, a lot of librarians are talking about this topic. Like, is it useful? How do we stop it? How do we get access to these journals? And then, of course, open access. There's a big topic around open access and using ICANNHasPDF to get around the paywall. Now, if we look at the hashtag co-occurrence, and this is from the ICANNHasPDF tweets that I got myself, you can see that, of course, ICANN has PDF is in the middle, but you also see copyright, you see data stores, you see academic, you see remember Aaron Swartz. You see these different hashtags that are basically suggesting that this is a way we can get or establish a movement for open access. We can push the publishers back, and we can get make science more open. So that's interesting, and that will I will do further analysis on this. So what I want to say about bringing the social theory in is that if you look at, so there's this account, HeCan has PDF, and it basically just retweets all these requests. But the interesting thing is, at the very top of this account, the pinned tweet establishes the social norms and rules of this community. Basically, it says, etiquette reminder, you need to include a DOI, your email address, and you need to delete the tweet once the PDF is received. So we've established structure, norms, rules for this community, which, you know, shows that it's active and people actually, it's difficult to collect these tweets through the streaming API because they get deleted so quickly. So it's an established norm. And if we bring more sociology into it, which I really like Irving Goffman, a sociologist from the 50s through the 80s, talked about impression management and stigma, and he also had this theory of frame analysis. And what he says is that with frame analysis, anytime we interact, in order that we all understand what's happening, so in this instance, for this example, I'm up here at the podium, I'm talking to you, you guys are seated, remaining quiet, some of you nodding your heads, which is nice. But there's this norm, this rule. So you're applying frames to my communication, and I'm applying frames to what you're doing, and we come together in sort of an agreement. And this is all done without us saying anything to each other, because we live in this social structure. So in this instance with ICANN has PDF, what we're doing really is we're taking the idea of open access, of piracy, of online communication, and we're laying this frame over the top of it from ICANN has cheeseburger. How many knows what that is? So it's a meme that started where basically you have pictures of cats that are typically funny, and then you have some terms like ICANN has cheeseburger, and it's spelled in a funny way. So we've taken this frame of something fun and exciting and something we can all nod our heads to and put it on top of this issue of basically stealing, which is really, really interesting. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I want to, you know, evaluate more of the tweets. That's where I'm taking this, hopefully before the paper is published. But for example, this tweet on the screen, let's try ICANN has PDF. So I'm going to try this hashtag thing. Here's my information, and then set the skate ray sharks research free. So they're framing it in this way that, you know, freedom, we're going to set the research free. I'm going to use ICANN has PDF, so I'm already framing it that way. And I'm re-keying, which is one of Goffman terms, I'm keying these frames in a way that I take piracy and make it fun. So that's what I'm doing with this research, and I think it's important that we bring more social theory to all metric studies. So that's it. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm just wondering if you've done any comparisons or thinking about Sci-Hub, where everything's uploaded already in direct download without a paywall.
The only thing is you don't get a lot of communication. Like there's not conversations with that. And I'm more interested in like that community that is built up around ICANN has PDF, because I can then see how they're interacting. Even though they delete the tweets quickly, I can capture some tweets. But Sci-Hub is definitely an interesting topic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Joe Ross Crossref. I've got a half-formed thought,
Okay.
Which is it's very interesting that the study of ICANN has PDF has a particular relationship with the medium, and as you say, people delete tweets very soon after they're made. I wonder if there's any other interesting altmetric C research that faces similar problems, where the thing itself confounds the medium and interferes with the investigation of itself.
That's a great question. I mean, that's something we'd have to think about. You know, I can't answer that off the top of my head, but that's really a good question. Yeah.
In our little librarian's corner just now, it occurs to me that it would be fascinating to map your social analysis of ICANN's PDF with VR chat in libraries.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the questions that we get are all around, how do I get this?
Right, right.
And it just comes down to, I'm going to be blunt, ignorance about how libraries serve their own students in terms of document delivery. Oftentimes, they find it too onerous to go through the process, even though it's more seamless than it's ever been. So, and just maybe where they are. They're on Twitter, so therefore they ask, as opposed to the library. So, just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought. And some of, actually, a lot of the research, there's very few publications looking at ICANN as PDF. There are a few, and many of them have been done by librarians, which is interesting. And actually, I can't remember what university, but some university library actually renamed their maybe interlibrary loan service or something to ICANN has PDF. Yeah, so they wanted to promote, you know, we can do this for you, right? So.
Allow me one question.
Yes.
Thank you for this presentation, but I can't stop thinking about, you know, you doing ICANN has data, kind of. Because you were using Altmetrics data now from altmetric.com, which was the database dump. Then Rodrigo provided you with data.
And I'm using my own data that I collected
from Twitter. And you're using your own data, which you kind of, you know, not stolen, but, you know, from Twitter.
I stole it.
Well, that is interesting. I mean, we were like, one session before, we were calling for open data, open metrics, open so on and so forth. Here's the example that we cannot do these kind of studies if there's the data, if it's not open, if we wouldn't have the network we have, we couldn't do that.
No, it's true, yeah, and this community makes it happen. And I think that something that's, you know, it's impossible for altmetric.com to handle this or any service, but collecting tweets around a hashtag becomes much more interesting because you can see this community engagement than just around a tweet on a DOI, because we don't get to capture everything before or everything after as easily. I mean, maybe it's possible, but up till now, it's been, you know, difficult. So around a hashtag is the way to go. If you can find one and then start collecting as soon as you see it, that's the problem.
I'll just, while we're on the topic of the data, that some of the sources that you were getting, like the DOAJ and the Sherpa Romeo, now this is the data set from OADOI.
Right.
Impact Share will at least make that part of it, it's all available openly, and if you had that at the time that you were doing this work, it would have been, at least half of those sources would have been nice and easy to get from OADOI, which I've started to use now as the place to figure out when, what things are open access and where are they available, archived or not. So at least we're getting some progress in terms of having some data availability.
Yeah, and I was going to hit up Priam and Heather in using their tool, but to send them basically a bunch of DOIs and have it run in the background and then give me all the data back. So something like that as well. But all these things are happening now, so we can start checking all these weird linkages that we find. All right, thanks.
So for our last presentation, we have Rodrigo from the Center for Science and Technology Studies at Leiden, and his paper will be identifying scholars on Twitter, opening the path to the social media studies of science. Let's put up for you. 28, yes. And your time will be up there as well.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for staying here. So the paper or the work I want to present today is mostly of a methodological nature. However, I wouldn't like to go very much into the details, particularly the technical details, and I would like to have a discussion with you more on the let's say, the potential, the implications that this type of methodologies, that this type of developments may have for the further development of research in the field of metrics. So let me start by saying that the identification of scholars on Twitter is not a new topic. So there has been already previous approaches, mostly based on survey data, snowball approaches, mining of hashtags. And more recently, as Tim mentioned, colleagues in Bloomington, they also have tried to identify scholars by using Twitter lists or the description of tweeters in Twitter. Perhaps the main problem of these previous approaches is that they have had a kind of relative, or they have been of a relative small scale. So focus on relatively small sets of researchers, focusing on specific fields or researchers with specific characteristics. And more important than the scale is that perhaps these previous approaches didn't link the identification of scholars with other broader databases, with other larger databases, like, for example, I would say bibliometric or centrometric databases. So it was not possible to compare the behavior of these scholars on Twitter with their behavior as publishers, as citing and collaborators. So in a way, what we want to do is to propose a methodology for a more large-scale identification of scholars on Twitter. So this approach, this methodology that we want to propose would be of a kind of bibliosocial media metric approach. So the main idea or the main philosophy behind the methodology is that we want to match two different universes. On the one hand, a set of disambiguated authors from the Web of Science that some colleagues developed at CWTS some years ago. And on the other hand, all the Twitter users, all the Twitter accounts that have been identified by Altmetric.com, at least up to June 2016. It's about 2.6 million different Twitter accounts. Somehow the philosophy or the theory behind this approach is that what we want to do is to connect the symbolic capital of scholars as researchers who publish papers and get citations and collaborate, with a symbolic capital as social media, okay? As in this case, as Twitters. So we want to connect these two worlds. I must acknowledge two main important restrictions in our methodology. The first restriction is that somehow researchers must use the real name on Twitter. Somehow we are not that interested in linking researchers with Twitter accounts where they don't identify themselves as yes, this is me, and I'm using my own name, my own identity. So that's one of the restrictions. The second restriction is that these scholars must have some activity recorded on Altmetric.com. So in practical terms, it means that they must have tweeted a publication, a data set, or any other scholarly artifact, which can be a limitation because obviously there may be scholars that are active on Twitter, but they never tweet or mention a paper. In any case, because we also want to have a kind of validation of idea of, well, how good could be our method, how comprehensive and how accurate is our method of identifying scholars, we use the data provided by ORCID, where some of the researchers that have their profiles in ORCID have included their Twitter accounts. There are not many, but some of them have done it. So we could use this data set as a kind of golden standard to check the precision and recall of our own methodology. In a way, I would also like to highlight that so this kind of validations were not that common in many of the previous approaches. So we never got an idea of how comprehensive or how broad were the previous approaches in identifying scholars. And at least with this approach, we get some hint, some idea of how good this could be. Okay, so how the methodology works. And I apologize for my lack of creativity in selecting an example. But so basically we would have someone who is on Twitter and is presenting or is describing, in this case, himself as a person with a name and a surname and some other information. On the other hand, we have the profile, the bibliometric profile of these researchers. So we have an ID, the year when the first publication was recorded, the author name, the email when this is found in the publications, and then all the affiliation information. So for example, the university, the city of the university, or the country. So essentially what we have done, and here I don't want to go very much into technical details, but was to parse the author names, or say the Twitter names of the tweeters in Altmetric.com, and try to match them with the author names in the Web of Science. Try to make as many linkages as possible. In addition, occasionally, tweeters also describe themselves as researchers or belonging to a specific organization. They may also disclose their geographic information, as also Sore was discussing before, and they may also provide some URL and some other information that can help us to somehow link to their bibliometric profile. But more importantly than this information, because actually the method doesn't require that you describe yourself as a researcher, but the most important thing is that what we have are the publications that the Twitter account has tweeted and the publications that the author has produced. So essentially what we can do is compare the similarity between these two sets of papers. So we can look if they are tweeting the same topics that the author is working on, if, for example, they are tweeting publications from the same journals, if there is an event of self-tweeting. So if, for example, we see that a Twitter account with exactly the same name as the author is tweeting a paper of the author, I think we can fairly assume that that Twitter account is the same author. And, well, some other indicators that I don't have time to go into detail. But essentially is that for every pair of Twitter author, we obtain a series of indicators that tell us something about the similarity in the set of publications tweeted and the set of publications produced by the author. And combining all this information, we end up with a kind of a score that we use to determine if the match between the author and the Twitter is good. It's very likely that the Twitter account is actually the author. So let me just jump to the results. So we have identified, with this method, we have identified more than 387,000 scholars with a Twitter account. This is about 2% of all the scholars that we have identified in our database. Based on the ORCID data, we have seen that the precision recall values are, precision is 94 and recall is 84, which is okay. So, but I must admit myself that I'm sure that we can improve these values, that we can increase the number of researchers that we can match, and that we can do it much better. So this is also something for further research. But just as a comparison, so the best previous approach that Tim mentioned before, that was done by Cassidy Sugimoto and Kim Chain in Bloomington, they identified about 46,000 individual scholars. And again, it's not only about the size that we have identified more scholars, it's that now we can link them back to their bibliometric profiles. So for example, something we can do is analyze the field of the researchers that have Twitter accounts and compare with those that don't have a Twitter account. And for example, something that we can see is how proportionally there are more researchers from the social and behavioral sciences that have a Twitter account, followed by researchers in the humanities. And this we can compare, for example, with the researchers in the natural sciences and the medical sciences. That, in a way, aligns a little bit with what Fedesde was also presenting before. So somehow we see that the same patterns are repeated depending on what we are analyzing, publications, or in this case, scholars. But we can also try more ambitious questions, more important questions. So, for example, what about the citation impact of the researchers that have a Twitter account? So we have produced this analysis in which, controlling by the production of the researchers, we also look at the proportion of highly cited publications as being in the top 1% most cited papers of their respective fields. And so separating those that have a Twitter account from those for which we were not able to identify a Twitter account, we can see how, in a quite systematic way, researchers with a Twitter account tend to have a higher proportion of top-cited papers. I think that we also need to be careful with these results. So we could easily say, oh yes, so then it's good to be on Twitter to have to be highly cited. I think we cannot jump to that conclusion, at least not yet, because of course there are many causality effects that we would need to understand. But I think that we can conclude at least something very basic. It seems that being on Twitter is not bad for your impact. So nobody can say, based on these results, that if you are on Twitter, you are wasting your time and your impact will suffer. At least I wouldn't be able to argue with these results, which is a lot. So all this takes me to my nearly last slides. That is thinking about the future. So what's next? From our side, from our research, is of course to try to improve this type of methodologies, try to make them more precise, also to increase the recall. I really believe that we can do much better. But I would say that one of the most important implications of this type of methodologies is that they open new research perspectives. So it's not anymore just about how a publication or a set of publications has been mentioned on Twitter or has been discussed on Facebook. Is that now we are going to be able to analyze what is the behavior of scholars on Twitter, what are their activities, what are their linkages, what are the relationships they are creating. Also, I think that it's important, this idea of bridging bibliometrics and social media metrics. In a way, it opens a door, I would say a unique door, to analyze social media science interactions. Something that somehow I think we haven't been able to do that much so far. And these are my final thoughts, and this is really an open question that I would love to discuss with all of you. Somehow, I think that during the last years, we have been trying to discuss quite two different worlds. On the one hand, the scholarly world, so citations, publications, research authors, peer review. And on the other hand, a world that was more focused on basically social media. So different rules, different type of communities, different audiences. And what we could call as, let's say, traditional metrics has been how are these publications, how are these scholarly objects being received on social media. So we have this side of the linkage. But what we can do now is actually see how the scholarly world, how the researchers, even the scholarly organizations are also interacting with social media. So we can address questions like, for example, are highly cited researchers active on Twitter effectively? Are they engaging in debates in social media when there is an issue about their topic they are doing research? Not simply saying if the publications of the researchers are being tweeted. So it opens the door to absolutely new indicators. And somehow, the idea that I'm starting to have is that we could have the opportunity to move away from the more almetric perspective of just seeing how publications or scholarly objects are received on social media, to discuss also how science has an effect, has an influence on what's happening on social media. It's something that we could call like social media studies of science or social media science relations. Well, this is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
No, first, congratulations. I think that it's a brilliant approach for trying to identify these, the scholars on a large scale. I say that to go along with what are the questions that this answers, and I agree, and I like that characterization of thinking about social interactions. But the other thing that it makes me think of, because I've been looking at identifying the non-scholars who are sharing research. And this, we identify those now by exclusion. Everybody that is not identified, we have a better sense that they are likely to not be a scholar. And so I think it also starts opening up questions around what are the research that is getting shared amongst other groups that are not researchers, and what's circulating amongst them, and what are the interactions that the non-academics are having with the work. So I think it also opens up a whole line of questions around what's the public's understanding of science, the public's use of science in other ways. So yeah, so mostly just a congratulations and a comment to say that it does open up a whole other set as well on top of what you were suggesting.
Thank you, Juan. I would say that, so also in the workshop, we came up with like two main streams of research that we're developing. So on the one hand is the network analysis that we were discussing quite carefully in the workshop. And I would say the other stream is the delineation of users, of audiences. So this is just an approach to identify a typology of users. So other users are, for example, organizations, are citizens, other groups that, let's say, from a bibliometric point of view, are more difficult to define. So in a way, although this project was difficult, it's easy in the sense that it's data that we control. But indeed, so I would say the future is this delineation of different audiences and different users.
Look to your right. Thank you very much. It was really interesting, and I totally agree with your main point, which is we want to know what happens after something gets retweeted. We actually want to know where it gets used. I'm just wondering if you are aware of the hashtag Scholar Sunday. So this will be very helpful for you. And for it's hashtag Scholar Sunday. And what people do is say, I follow scholar so-and-so for their research on this. It's not specific to social sciences. It's anyone who's doing any research. It only comes out on Sundays. So it's going to be very easy to track. And there's some really interesting people that come out. The other cautionary tale, I'm looking around, but Jagras isn't here, so this would be her point, is the problem is if you're trying to identify people who are using their real name in their Twitter handles, is problematic, especially, as Jagras would have said if she was here, for female scholars. And so there's going to have to be some sensitivity built into the modeling for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But overall, great.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the recommendation.
So we have up until 1 to take questions. So if you have more, certainly come to the mic. It helps the conversation. If you have questions for the other panelists as well, that would be great.
Question for Timothy. Fantastic research, really enjoyed it. We've seen similar sort of systems in society, like, for instance, video streaming, and we've seen software over the last 10 years or so on all the questions of piracy. And so I was going to ask you, how do you think this level of piracy with the global push towards open access is going to change the business models of companies like Elsevier in the publication and the paywall? Because, or is the level of piracy so small that they're just going to kind of ignore it and get on with business?
Well, that's a tough question. I'd ask the publishing people in the room to help answer that question. But as you said, it's so small, right? But Sci-Hub is growing quite a bit, really quickly. So, I think there is a movement, an underground movement that has framed itself in such a way that everybody gets behind it because we all love open access. So I think it has to have an effect. I mean, if you look at music, what did MP3s do to the music industry? Like, completely changed it, right? So.
Anybody else with a question? If you have a loud voice, you can also, you don't have to make the commute, but.
Far from it. So this is a question for you. I'm really interested in the demographics of scholars on Twitter because I work at a foundation and we work with varying generations of scholars, and being able to go to older scholars and show them the activity of younger scholars would be helpful, I think, in encouraging them to do so. Do you have any plans to expand your analysis to include demographics?
The question is if we could produce more demographics now? Yeah, we can. So
okay.
I actually had a whole bunch of slides that I removed yesterday night because I was aware of the little time we had. But so we can do demographics by country. So then you can see the typical pattern with China and Russia not being that strong on having scholars on Twitter. We have also looked at age. So we took the year of the first publication of the researchers as the proxy of their age. And then what you see is that they tend to be younger compared to those that are not on Twitter. We plan to do gender analysis as well. And, well, basically everything that you can link to, let's say, to a bibliometric database is possible to explore now.
That would be fantastic.
Any other questions or comments?
People have been using Scrib to bootleg. Yeah, me too. I belong also to an antiquated listserv that has been going on for at least 25 years. For people that do research in my area, there are constantly, at least once a week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week, can you send me this article? Now, a lot of times those are things that are just not available anymore. but somebody has it in their backlog of their PDFs that they've saved. But a lot of it is what would be a hashtag if these people actually used Twitter.
And that's a point that we talked about in the workshop on, when was that, Tuesday, that we're missing a lot of data sources, and we tend to focus on the social media and the new things, the new shiny toys, but we forget about Usenet and listservs and email. So there's definitely knowledge of that. It's just, it's difficult. So, you know, they don't have APIs. So what do? You have to actually go scrape it, and it becomes more difficult.
Any other questions? Okay, so this has been a really interesting panel. A lot of discussion on bots, or even looking back to yesterday's keynote of new noise that comes with social media. So I think that we can continue this discussion in our lunch. And also, for those of you interested, at 1:40, we'll also be doing a small tour of the social media lab. You can just meet at the reception, and Philip will take you over. So thank you, and thank you to the presenters.